There's a lot of kids out there who need your help, and a donation to St. Jude could potentially save them. Link to my fundraiser is in the description.
This is a joke, right? This is a joke. Because, I told Lino... Shut up, Lino! Shut up!
I'd say that the general output and excitement of game announcements hasn't missed that many beats, whether it be a solo presentation like a Nintendo Direct, or a social media trailer that's just plopped online to see where it goes. I think we're doing just fine with these nowadays. That said, when taking mass conferences like E3, the Game Awards, and what have you into account, the general feeling of them isn't the same as it was years ago. I understand some compromises need to be made to accommodate for what's going on in the world, and how it has affected game development in every form, but to be honest, most mass game conferences nowadays have left a lot to be desired. I know it's easy to rag on how we've come to expect these kinds of shows to give us Space Shooter number 2049, Superhero number 761, or Cinematic Trailer number I Lost Count, but with solo presentations like Nintendo Directs and State of Plays still having cool stuff, is the answer really just E3 and so forth chasing trends? Or is there more to unpack? Well, with the state of E3 2023 not looking so hot, and most of these kinds of conferences not exactly cutting the cheese, I thought it'd be interesting to go through and try to make sense of what's going on without being too homogenous with whoever is yelling on Twitter. So first of all, while game announcements in general can get people excited, the hype generated can be on a different level when done at these kinds of events. Actually putting in the effort into a live show to draw in a crowd can also go a long way in not only drawing strong reactions, but also historical moments. Part of the reason why the Joker reveal for Smash Ultimate at the 2018 Game Awards was so effective was because it was done with the crowd, where they could have easily gotten away with the style they were trying to go for. The Fan of Thieves essentially hijacking the entire theater would not have worked if it were just a digital event. Or how about that Shenmue 3 reveal from E3 2015, which caught people so off guard that it literally crashed Kickstarter. And if you really want to go farther back, need I mention that Twilight Princess reveal? These kinds of moments and this kind of interactivity between company and consumer is the biggest positive mass conferences have going for them and what has kept them afloat for decades, not to mention the potential demonstrations you could watch or even play. These kinds of events were also really cool to see companies come together and celebrate gaming on top of show off what they've been working on. You really can't find these moments in a Direct or a State of Play, or at least any replacements you would get would feel generally lesser and not as enticing. That's also why, despite all that has happened, some people are still willing to watch or even attend them. That's a big reason why some shows like the Game Awards still rake in views and social media buzz, although interest in these isn't as high nowadays. We can definitely point and laugh at a lot of bad conferences all we want, saying that out loud reminds me how much we laughed at Microsoft conferences way back when, but I think the first sign to the hype of these dying down was how many companies were unfortunately pulling out. Now, it's pretty easy to shrug off Nintendo choosing to go with pre-recorded presentations, since the popularity of Nintendo Directs was skyrocketing in the early 2010s, not to mention they were likely facing financial troubles with the Wii U, but I do think things became a little more clear once Sony opted to step out of E3 2019 to focus on their State of Plays. At the time, State of Plays were generally not as well received, but I think one reason they got better was because the lack of E3 and the choice to just not go to anything else gave them more to work with. They could attend whatever event they please and update people whenever, but I make the case that if the State of Play started getting some really neat announcements, what would they have to show at E3 that we haven't seen already? It's obvious that game development isn't easy, but that also applies to supplying updates, as you really can't just whip one out on a whim. Some planning has to go into it months prior in order for it to leave a positive impact, and so everyone has enough time to do their respective jobs. And digital presentations seem to make things easier. That mentality was then kicked up a notch, and work management became even harder once 2020 happened, and the world went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It was already hard to rethink schedules for games currently in development if the delays are anything to go by, let alone think of good release windows for games that had their final builds pretty much done, but with the cancellation of E3 2020 and several other conferences, there was not much left to turn to. Although, Jeff Keighley is certainly trying. I may have my own thoughts on Jeff Keighley and several of his practices, but I at least respect his work to attempt to fill in the void by creating Summer Games Fest, not to mention continuing to provide premieres at the Game Awards. Despite how I've personally never cared for any of the Summer Games Fest so far, I will also give the industry the benefit of the doubt that they usually don't have the best resources to make them as extravagant as they want to. But that's the thing. Because many companies like Nintendo and Sony have mostly done presentations on their own accord, it does take away from what could have potentially been great shows for Summer Games Fest. Not to mention, with Keighley's involvement in several of these mass conferences, these have felt very homogenous. Not only have the announcements been pretty boring, those jokes exist for a reason, but the way they've been handled have been incredibly similar to the Game Awards, just with no awards. I guess I should praise it for consistency, but with so few announcements to keep me engaged, it gives me little reason to keep on watching, and a lot of others feel the same way. And we could just say that they're trying to be cool with the general masses, or just trying to use fame to sell, or yada yada, insert whatever Twitter jargon you can find, but I see it's both that, and something that's really eating away at mass events more. With development getting messy with loads of games, and with the increasing interest in solo presentations from both company and consumer, and with the increased time spent on social media, most companies seem completely disinterested in relying on mass events for publicity. With solo presentations, they can announce and update whatever they want, when they want, completely unrestricted by any deadline set by somebody else. I remember when it was cool to think that Nintendo was generally doing its own thing, even in the Wii U era, but with so many companies taking a similar approach, or just flat out dropping trailers online, why would they want to hold a massive event that they need to spend months setting up in this giant location, spending loads of money to that degree of marketing and setup, when they could just hype people up with what they apparently want to see? The game announcements. The companies can still arrange for a schedule for what you do and when, but they're the only one in control of that. Nobody else. Now granted, contributing only one trailer to an event can be all some people might need in order to get interested in a product. Why else do you think most companies choose to reveal one thing at conferences like the Game Awards? Because a single announcement isn't as much of an undertaking as several, and that's something many of them realize. And all of that factors in potential attention on social media that can help drive it, even to games that quite literally come out of nowhere. We recently saw this with Hi-Fi Rush. Huge groups of people talking about a game on social media can be all it needs to succeed, and a solid marketing campaign doesn't always guarantee that. The bigger risks with how money is spent don't always equal the best results. So what I'm getting at is, with all this going on, the announcements that have gotten people excited have gone elsewhere, while the mass game conferences are mostly being left hung to dry, and as such, I think they become less and less special, which we'll likely feel with E3 2023, unless they decide to cancel it too. So to all this I must ask, what can we do? Well, when it comes to us as consumers, I'm really not sure. A lot of this involves what we choose to dedicate our attention to, and with our attention always on directs, even begging for more, they can't just go back to how things were a few years ago overnight. All I can figure out is if companies show interest in being part of these conferences and spacing out their announcements to accommodate them, and for us to tune in if we're actually interested in seeing it, instead of just waiting until it's uploaded online, then we might actually see some growth. But I don't know when or if that'll happen. Not to mention, forcing this kind of thing on the general public with the intent of changing something almost never works. But despite how things are, I don't think these kinds of mass events will be gone for good. They definitely would have gone on for this long if they didn't have that special something, nor would they have gone on if they didn't adapt to the changing landscape for the past few decades. But I do think they need a bit of reevaluation in order to win back attention, even if it involves a hiatus, because there's several things that a physical conference can do that a digital presentation cannot. I definitely agree that E3 is not in a good spot, with the 2021 event being homogenous with other Keighley stuff, the 2022 one being cancelled, and the 2023 one not looking so good, and interest in the rest has gone down in recent times, albeit for some reasons that are a different story. But when taking all this into account, what have these events got left to show? Not much. So ultimately, whatever companies decide to do next is up to them. I'm Lightning Ripper, and thank you all for watching.